now we've got the bird skinned out. Now we're going to be that seed. That bird picks it up with its beak. It goes into the esophagus right here. And then it goes into this, which if you ask your grandpa, he'd say that's the craw. Actually, that's the crop, C-R-O-P. And that serves as a storage, a Ziploc storage bag there for a quail keep their seed. You might say, how does that help a quail in a sea of predators? That allows for an eat and run lifestyle. Bird can go out, eat very quickly, store that seed there. It doesn't have to stand there and chomp and so forth on it. It goes back to the security of a quail house. So that is a vital adaptation for an eat and run lifestyle. Rarely will a quail fly over 150 yards. So that, again, from a cover standpoint, that says I got to have my cover well interspersed. I can't have food here and cover 2 miles over here. That won't work for a quail. Now, if you'll notice, the breast muscle is a large muscle in the quail. Again, I equate it to a 396 engine. Man, it can pass everything but a gas station. It just can't go very far. So let's dissect the breast muscle. And I want to see what kind of a breastbone that this quail has. But you can see that this quail has a well-developed keel or sternum. That's a muscle attachment. So in order for a wing to flap to provide flight, it has to have a muscle that has 2 attachment points, one here at the sternum, the other one at the wing. And when that big muscle's contracting, that's what's causing that flight. Okay, let's move back up here to the crop. This is where the seeds are stored. Ever so often a seed comes on back down into the esophagus. Now let's find out where it goes next. We're going to dissect out the contents of this crop in just a minute and look at some of those seeds. But first of all, let's find out what its journey through the center of the quail would consist of. First of all, you see the heart right here. Now, the esophagus goes to the dorsal side, to the top side of the heart. Look at this little organ. It looks almost like a second heart right here. This is the next stop on our journey. This is called the proventriculus. But a quail has a 2-part stomach. It has a glandular stomach, much like mine and yours, called the proventriculus, and then it has a muscular stomach called the gizzard. We'll take the crop first. Just going to tear it open. You can tell by its dark black color that it's been eating something that's looks like grape jelly. There is a fruit up here that we have a lot of this year. It's called Chittim, also called gum elastic or Bumelia, but we call it Chittim. And you can see it has a pretty large seed, about twice the size of a popcorn seed. The larger the seed a quail can get down, the better it is. It doesn't have to work as hard to get a lot of seed. It can eat a seed the size of corn. So this bird had that big a seed available on the 1st of February. That's a good thing if you're a quail. Now let's look into the gizzard. All right, now I'm going to spill some of the contents of the gizzard out. And while I'm doing that, you be thinking about what organ that you and I have that serves the same function as the gizzard. In the quail, the gizzard, or in any bird that has a gizzard, the function is to contract and grind seeds. So this is analogous to what organ we have? Our molar teeth. How many teeth does a quail have in its lifetime? 1. The egg tooth, the tooth that's right here on its beak as it cuts its way out of the eggshell. You can impress your family and friends with that trivia. All right, so here's the gizzard. It's just a small muscle. By contracting, the inner lining of the gizzard is tough, like sandpaper. And so it'll grind and contract, and that way it basically chews those seeds up. So you can see here that now instead of whole seeds, for the most part, we have various broken down pieces of seed. And those just basically go on through the bird. Again, that allows it to eat in a hurry, go back under the safety of a lote bush or a Chittim thicket, and then basically digest that seed slowly over the day. Quail basically have 2 times of the day in which they feed. Early morning, typically till about 9:30 or 10 o'clock in the morning, and then they go out again after about 4 p.m. But all that time in between, they're huddled up under some kind of bush where they're not exposed to their predators, and they're basically letting the gizzard do the work for them at that time. Once we've left the gizzard, now we enter into the small intestine. What happens there? The nutrients are absorbed. Then at the juncture of the small intestine and the large intestine, there's a pair of little blind guts, and they're called ceca. Singular would be cecum. Now, do we have a cecum as humans? I do. I don't know if you do. It's called the appendix. And in humans, it's very, very little. In a horse, it's very, very large. In a rabbit, it's very large. Quail have a pair of those, and that's where microbial digestion occurs. It basically functions much like the rumen in a deer or a cow. And that's this little organ right here, and again, either side of that, either side of the intestine, there will be one, about the length of your little finger, but only about a third the diameter of it. If you were looking for worms in a bobwhite, that's the place you'd look. There are probably little bitty nematodes, little roundworms in there. Then from there we go into the large intestine, which is the larger gut here. And that's where basically water is pulled out of that food content because a bird is very water conscious. They don't use a lot of drinking water. They get most of the water they need from the foods that they eat. So they recycle that water, and they pull that water out of the large intestine. Now, think about it. Do quail urinate? The answer is no. But they have to get rid of nitrogenous waste. I mean, they have kidneys that produce nitrogenous waste. They get rid of that in their feces, in their dropping, but their urine is actually more in a solid form. It's called uric acid. It's the white stuff you see in quail droppings. Okay, now we want to discuss the reproductive tract. Now, keep in mind this bird was shot on 2nd of February. Birds around here don't go to breeding until about 3 months from now. So if we begin to look for the testes, we'd be looking for the two little black dots on either side of the backbone. And if we had a hen here, we'd notice that the ovary was very much reduced also. Why? Because birds are very weight conscious. And if there's no need for carrying around extra weight, they're not going to. So those gonads, in this case the testes, are much reduced in the wintertime. And they don't become larger until the breeding season begins. By the time 1st of May gets here, those will be the size of a .50 caliber muzzleloader ball. And here's something very interesting about a hen. How many ovaries would you expect? Well, you'd expect 2, of course. Well, they don't have 2. They only have 1. And it's always on the left side. Don't ask me why. But they don't need 2 ovaries, so they don't have 2. And although they're much reduced during the winter, we're going to look at some birds later that are taken during late May, and we'll see that those gonads are much larger during the reproductive season. If you remember back to our discussion of the breast muscle, we talked about it being light meat. Think about that color relative to the color of the leg muscles. And you'll say, oh, the legs are darker. Okay, after what we learned about light muscles and dark muscles relative to energy, which would you expect to be darker? The legs or the breast? Well, when you think about it, a quail does a lot more walking and running than it does flying. So it needs more heavy-duty muscles down in here for oxygen than it does in its breast muscle, which is rarely used. So your leg muscles, just like in a chicken, the leg muscles are going to be dark meat as opposed to white meat. Going back to Leonard Skinner and Freebird, we know that this bird you cannot change. So again, with a better understanding of its anatomy and physiology, we know why we can't change it and how we can change the environment to fit the bird's needs.